right. Thanks for that introduction, Jonathan. I guess I'll go ahead and begin. I am Erica Bufanda. I'm a sixth-year graduate student at the University of Hawaii Manoa Institute for Astronomy. It's amazing to say that out loud. I've been here for 6 years, still in denial about that. It's kind of a retro picture. This is me in front of the Gemini North telescope approximately 6 years ago when I was just a measly protograd visiting Hawaii. So it's really nice to actually come full circle and use Gemini data today for my thesis. And so today I'll be talking about the color analysis portion of my thesis, specifically because it does use and utilize Gemini North and South data. And so, is it working? Oh, I can't go to the next slide for some reason. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the kind of comets that I study are from the Oort cloud. So this is an artist's representation of our own solar system. If you can see my mouse, that these gray orbits right here are the orbits of all of the planets. And then right outside of that is the Kuiper belt. That's kind of a dusty, icy donut just past Neptune's orbit. And then if you go way out into the outskirts, 10,000 to 100,000 astronomical units away from us, we have the Oort cloud. It's kind of a spherical, icy shell of debris, a relic that was left over from the primordial time, which was our solar system's birth. Now, when the solar system was forming, we had the protoplanetary disk phase when the planets were coalescing, material was flung in many different directions, scattered, and eventually some of it settled in the outer solar system, forming that icy graveyard. Now, fast forward to the present, some of this material is gravitationally disturbed yet again by a passing star or a supernova, and it's sent inward to the inner solar system where we observe it for the first time as a long period comet. And I like to call these small bodies volatile vehicles to the past, volatile meaning ice, and vehicles to the past because they have some of the most primitive preserved materials from the early solar system having been preserved in the Oort cloud in cold storage for billions of years. And so when we study their properties, we're looking back in time to the early formative processes of our solar system. And so, oops, the kind of LPCs or long period comets that I study are dynamically new, dynamically old, and Manx comets. The first one, dynamically new, they're fresh from the Oort cloud. They have the most eccentric orbit stretched out, the largest, furthest approach to the sun. In contrast, dynamically old, they have had many orbital iterations. They've been around the inner solar system a few times. And then Manx comets can either be dynamically new or dynamically old, but with the addition that their activity is very minimal in comparison to other LPCs. We colloquially refer to them as Manxes because they're like the tailless Manx cat. As you can see here, the dust tail of C2014 S3 is much less prominent at a shorter heliocentric distance than Hale-Bopp is in this other photo. And so using these three populations, I attempt to answer three different outstanding fundamental hypotheses in planetary science. And I'll be focusing on these last two here because it's directly related to my Gemini data. The first one, can color be an indicator of a comet's dynamical evolution? And secondly, can Manx objects constrain solar system formation models? The motivation behind the first question is posed by Jan Oort himself in the 1950s when he hypothesized that there should be differences between the surface properties of dynamically new and dynamically old comets. Now, historically, this has been difficult to investigate because when we discover LPCs, they're already active. They already have a dust tail, and this obscures the surface colors that we measure. And so it's very difficult to disentangle that dust tail from the actual surface materials. And we've seen this time and time again with ground-based observations of comets as well as spacecraft missions. So here in this plot, this is reflectivity as a function of wavelength. It's like the reflectivity of the comet minus the solar reflectivity. And so for two different dates for K2 pan stars, you see that the the spectral slope is slightly different, which indicates that activity affected the color we measured. And then this effect is a lot more prominent for the Rosetta mission to Comet 67P, which shows that older surfaces show redder, more steeper slopes in comparison to surfaces after undergoing activity, revealing fresh icy surfaces that are much bluer and have a shallower slope as a result. So the question is, can we disentangle the activity from the surface colors? And that's part of the motivation behind one of these questions I'm investigating. And the second question has to do with the Manx population. So we don't have that complication where activity is obscuring the surface properties of these minor bodies. In fact, it's a lot easier to measure their colors and compare them to asteroid types to kind of infer where they originated in the protoplanetary disk. So if you see in the schematic here, this shows the protoplanetary disk in kind of a simple schematic where the inside is red, the outside is blue. And it shows that when the planets were forming and when material was forming, anything that was formed at a certain spot in the disk, it gets that chemical signature wherever, and then it's scattered into some other place in the solar system. So different solar system formation models predict different amounts of inner solar system material scattered out to the Oort cloud. And if we have a population of Manx comets and we compare those to asteroid classes, which can tell us where these small bodies formed, we can attempt to constrain and rule out some of these models. And so it all boils down to doing a detailed color analysis of both active LPCs and inactive LPCs or Manx comets. For the active LPCs, we're separating we're measuring the activity, or sorry, the colors pre and post closest approach to the sun. And then we're using independent methods to attempt to separate dust from these surface colors. And then for the Manx comets, we measure their colors using broadband photometry, and then we assess their asteroid class and look at their population as a whole. And so usually the sequence of events goes that once a comet is discovered by an all-sky survey, and for reference, approximately 30 comets are discovered per year, or LPCs specifically. Then I have a program set up at the Canada-France-Hawaii telescope where I conduct calculated follow-up observations in order to constrain their orbits as well as predict their brightness over time. And this informs an even further follow-up observation from Gemini north or south in order to get their color through broadband photometry. Here where we show the spectral reflectivity as a function of wavelength for different filters on Gemini and how we can use that to distinguish between asteroid classes and map the spectral slopes as well. And then for our brighter targets, we also use spectra. Oops, is it gonna go next? There we go. Okay, so I've had the pleasure of being able to gather data using both Gemini North and Gemini South from the 2020B semester to the present, using a variety of band designations. And I've been able to collect 34 target colors, so 34 active LPC colors. At least a dozen of those have multi-epoch colors or pre and post closest approach to the sun. And we mitigate for rotation by interweaving the G filter in between our photometry. And so for our Manx comets, I've also had the fortunate circumstance of being handed all of this data from my advisor, Dr. Karen Meach, where she has over 80 target colors obtained for this population. And for all of these targets, we reduce our images using the Gemini Dragon software, which is very fantastic, and I'll show some of the outputs of that in the next couple of slides. And so this is an example of the output from the Gemini Dragon software. In this first panel in the upper left, this is the direct output after running the reduction routine. You'll see that we have some vignetting going on, and thankfully it's been confined to the outer chip. Usually what we do is we extract the central chip because we've been informed that is where the photometry is the most robust. The trade-off is that we do lose some stars for photometric calibration, but it's okay. It usually it works out. Sometimes it doesn't, but that's just something we have to work with. So The next thing we do is sometimes the image is still not entirely flat, and so we use source extractor to flatten the image, and then I do photometry using PanSTARRS, the PanSTARRS database. Okay, and so one other thing that we do is correct for fringing, which happens in the wideband. Dragons has a really nice automated routine that does this automatically. Sometimes, and I'm not entirely sure why this happens, but sometimes the routine doesn't get all of the fringe out. And in that case, I also do a manual removal of the fringe using a slightly more robust, slightly different technique that was developed by Snodgrass and Carey in 2013, and ESO that is a little bit more complicated, and we can talk about that if we have more time at the end, so please let me know. And this is the complicated process, but the thing to note is in the end, the fringe is gone, so that's the good thing. And so let's go ahead and talk about some preliminary results, and please keep in mind that a huge amount of this thesis work was put towards developing image manipulation techniques, reduction routines, data collection, data gathering. So finally now in my final year, I'm working on the analysis and implementing these routines. And so we don't have a lot of results in terms of the entire population, but we can show what the data looks like. And so if we start off with the upper left-hand side, this is a comet that is weakly active, and I think it is now active. So when we compare it to other small bodies, we notice that the colors are a lot redder in comparison to a comet on the right upper right-hand side, C2021A9, which is close to perihelion or closest approach to the sun, and it's a lot bluer. We speculate that's because it's more active. We have C2018D04 in the bottom left-hand corner, and we have multiple dates for this target. The interesting thing is its colors do not change, even though this is a very active target. So that's something that we are definitely going to investigate. But we are still working on reducing and analyzing all of our small bodies, all of our LPCs. And this final image right here of C2018EF9 is an example of our Gemini data working overtime, what I like to say, call it. But basically this red star is where we have Gemini data. And in addition to doing a color analysis, our photometry works as data points to construct the brightness light curves of our comets. And so using Gemini data, we were able to construct the outburst for C2018EF9. So it's helping us in two different ways. Some work that I'm currently working on is the dust modeling that I mentioned earlier. So the dust modeling is something that we're using to try to disentangle this dust from the active LPC so we can probe their surface colors. And basically what we're doing is we have a model that was developed by Farnham et al. In 1996 for his thesis. And we have an observation of an active LPC that we're able to model based on its grain size distribution, its emission velocity, its dust production rate, and this helps inform our color analysis. And so one question that we want to ask ourselves too is, can we do a population analysis with such a small sample, right? We have 34 targets. Can we do some science with this? And the answer is yes. And we know this because in previous small body surveys of centaurs and Kuiper belt objects, color trends have been discovered for these small bodies with such very similar small populations. So we are still very optimistic that if there are trends present, we will be able to detect them. Okay, and so a brief aside about Las Cumbres Observatory. Sometimes our targets get too bright for Gemini, and we're able to observe them with the Las Cumbres Observatory network. And the really nice thing about this observatory is it has a teaching component. In addition, we integrate the High Star program, which gets high school students familiarized with astronomy research. And actually one of my students won a few awards for her science fair on comet colors. And so we're able to train the next generation of planetary scientists this way. And so another kind of—
Your time.
Oh, how many minutes do I have left? Just one or?
1 minute.
Okay. All right. I'll just breeze through these next couple of slides. I was able to come out with a paper that showed that a Manx object had some interestingly evolving colors. So we had this target had colors that were getting redder. We believe this is because a dust mantle was developing at the surface, and this is about to be published within the next 2 months. And so hopefully. And then for our Manx population, the gist of it is they have a diversity of surface colors, and we never expected that. In comparison to SPCs or short period comets, this is widely unexpected, and we're looking forward to investigating this population in the future. And so this is my where I'm at in my thesis slide. It's been a lot of work so far, and it's going to be a lot more work in this hopefully final year. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Erica. Any questions? Either in the room, on Slack, remotely. And I was thinking, if you're in the room and you don't want to go up to the microphone, you can also just use Slack if you prefer. So go ahead.
There is a question on Slack. So Stephen Gwynn is asking that you said you do additional sky flattening with S extractor. Could you elaborate a bit?
Yes, yeah. So Source Extractor is a program that its main goal is to extract sources, like the name suggests. Well, one nice thing that it does is it also estimates the background. It estimates the average background as well as the map of the average background. And so it kind of picks out the unevenness in the background and creates a FITS file from that. And I'm able to subtract that and get a very flattened image as a result. So I don't use it for its intended purpose, but I still use it.
Let me follow up on that by asking how you said dragons would correct the fringes in most cases, but you had to use a different method. And I was wondering, maybe it's not so much a question for you, it's for Kathleen, whether that could be implemented in dragons. You know,
yes.
What's your thought on that?
So I think it's interesting because I'm not entirely sure why for some cases it doesn't work. I haven't been able to ascertain like what's causing some cases to, because what usually happens, or what happens for those unique cases, is that it'll do most of the fringe subtraction, but some of the fringe will still be there. And I'm not entirely sure why. I think that me and Kathleen have talked about this way back, maybe like a year ago, briefly. I think there's some input parameters that need to be tweaked for some of the images, but to be honest, yeah, I don't exactly know.
Hi, Erica, I have a question. So one of your slides, you showed the reflectivity versus wavelength. Those like 3 plots for inactive comets and the active comets. So yeah, the earlier. So for the active comets, the reason the reflectivity is low is because they are dustier, or?
Oh,
I don't study comets, so if you can
sure, yeah, absolutely. Do you mean
that one? Yes. Yeah,
okay,
the active cases.
So usually what's been seen in the past is that when the slope is shallower, that is when the surface is bluer. And what's been seen in spacecraft missions is after activity, like fresher, like ice deposits are revealed on the surface that are blue in color, and that's what causes these shallower slopes. Another thing that could be happening is the dust coma itself scatters the light in a way so that it affects the color. And that's what's also causing the shallower slope. And so the idea is that the grains, they have some kind of properties. They have, what's it called? So grains have like a size distribution, and depending on that size distribution, it will reflect the light in different ways. And so the idea is to get as much information as about the grains as possible to see if we can get rid of that effect on the surface colors. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Erica. Let's thank Erica again.
Thanks, everyone.